Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about traps and some of the ideas I have for them for next Leaguestart. Now, the last thing a lot of you guys will be interested in is hearing about league starters right now. We're at least a month out of the next league, but I'm super burned out of the league. Nobody cares about non-MF builds, and last epoch is right around the corner, so I kind of thought I would do a little bit of this right here, and I kind of got reinvigorated of playing Path of Exile right now by this little hotfix right here. We're going to talk about it in a second. But I want to coherently make a video about traps. I think people got way too comfortable with Seismic Trap being the trap, and after it was gone, they didn't really talk about it all that much. They thought Saboteur got nerfed, so that's a big deal. Turns out it's not as big of a deal as you might think. We're going to talk about all of that. But first up, I want to talk about the first trap right here, which is Ball Lightning of Static Trap. Now, we've seen some hardcore players try Ball Lightning of Static, and also a lot of softcore players followed suit. And a lot of people have told me, obviously, because they want me to play more totems, right? And I gotta say, the build looks very impressive. The first person I saw play it personally was Rise QT, and then also Tatiantel. Link to them down in the description. But what I want to talk about here is a certain hotfix that kind of flew under the radar. Somebody in my chat informed me that on February the 1st, there was a small hotfix. They fixed a bug where Ball Lightning of Static could target incorrectly when fired by a trap or mine. See, what would happen is if I throw a Ball Lightning of Static trap right here and it explodes, it wouldn't explode on top of the pack. It would actually explode somewhere even outside here, not even within the game world itself. And that probably is a weird bug where the game thought it was maybe a projectile and it kind of landed at the end of the projectile. Whatever, it is fixed, but Ball Lightning traps were not a thing before. Why is that actually interesting though? So Ball Lightning of Static is a cooldown skill. It has 1.5 second cooldown on default without any increases and reductions, has 5 crit, 90% damage effectiveness, which is actually 50% more damage than the original. It's actually a lot more though, because the way Ball Lightning works is it doesn't have a duration tag. It stays there until it hits a single target up to 13 times with a 150 millisecond delay. So it stays out for around about 1.9 seconds. Now, on normal Ball Lightning, what you had to do is actually increase your AoE, decrease the speed so that enemies that stand within actually get hit for 13 times before the Ball Lightning travels out of the enemy, right? So otherwise you don't get your full damage. That was a lot of investment and very cumbersome. Not with this one right here. Ball Lightning of Static is static, so they will get hit for the full amount. Having a cooldown is a huge downside though, and even though you have CDR down here and you can get Ashes of the Stars later, especially for Leaguestart, that doesn't really fly. One of the things though that you can do is support it with trap support. Why would you do that? Mostly because now it's a trap skill. It doesn't get the trap tag, so it doesn't work with, for example, +2 traps, but it is considered a trap, and that means you can now use advanced trap support. Not only that, but also all other sources of trap cooldown recovery speed, for example, from Tinker Skin right here, or on the passive tree, you can get another 20%. On top of that, you can actually go from 3 uses to 4. So just to showcase you this, with a Ball Lightning of Static with advanced traps, I can actually pre-throw these pretty hard. Up to, I think, 11-ish. Yeah, 11-ish, and then they explode, and they all overlap. I'm sitting at 0.52 second cooldown time. I'm also Saboteur, so I'm also getting another 30% CDR from that. But in total, in endgame, you will be sitting at around about 0.45. Now, one of the biggest things about trap support is that it doesn't really have much of a less damage multiplier. It has 9% less damage, which at level 20, it has 6% less damage. And if we look at, for example, Spell Totem support, we're talking 40% less damage at level 20, and then you also have that less cast speed multiplier. And while yes, it doesn't scale with cast speed, that still means your totems are going to be a lot more clunky, and they're going to have kind of delay and not as much burst as you'd like. Another problems I personally had with the totem version is that you also now have a cooldown on your totems, which means you're not as flexible in terms of placing them. Now, obviously, I'm not a totem build, but just imagine you place down 3 of them, and then they all die, and all of a sudden, I have to wait until I can replace them. That is kind of a problem. Usually, totems dying isn't that big of a deal because you have multi-totem, which you can't really use here because it does consume 2 cooldowns if you put 2 down with multi-totem. In general, I've played it to around about yellow maps at this point, but I have found it to be still very strong. It still has a lot of damage, but I personally like the trap version. So yeah, if you wanted to try this out early in the league, there has been bug reports on the forum. It is now finally fixed in case you did not notice. It's just awesome that it scales with cooldown with trap CDR. It has huge AoE to combat traps worst clear, which is quite a big deal. Now, Per default, this is actually 2.8 meter, even without all the AoE from Saboteur. If you guys don't know, you get 50% CDR here, but you also get all these small nodes, which all add up to 82% AoE in total. And then you have 3.8 meters. And mind you, this is just one singular trap that pops off and just zaps enemies repeatedly. Now, another thing that this build actually pairs quite well is chance for traps to trigger an additional time. If you guys don't know this stat, usually it is quite mid, because what that means is not that it just explodes for double damage. It means that after it triggers, it rearms and now it has to be triggered by something again. However, if you play chain reaction, that is less of an issue, and especially here, it's a lot more valuable because this does not consume a cooldown, at least as far as I could see so far, which means you get another freebie. I think there are some other sources, but most efficient ones are Clever Construction 10% here, and then you can also get 8% from the Trap Mastery. In general, when it comes to leveling, if you want to try this out as a Saboteur, I would just warn you that at level 32, it felt a little bit clunky. You also want to pair it with another cooldown trap, probably Lightning Spire Trap or something like that, simply because advanced trap support is kind of weird. It starts out very low. It has crazy scaling. It starts out at 50% CDR and goes up to 107 at level 20 or 110 at level 21, which is kind of like having another 2 times like Clockwork on top. So the disparity between that and what you will have in like normal and yellow maps is ridiculous. On top of that, Ball Lightning of Static has weird scaling mid-game, where some of the first levels will give you a ton more damage than some of the other spells, for example, I've seen. It is quite noticeable, as well as that the quality gives you even more cooldown recovery rate. So once you farm up labs and just get free quality on top, that is going to be a big deal. So even if you're somebody who wants to farm their main skill at level 32 in normal lab, I would still personally recommend level it in your offhand and start at level 55, because at level 55 you will have both chain reaction and like Clockwork to make it a lot smoother. But there is a good chance that before next league starts, I will do a full run of this and probably a full video on it. So far, I just don't have enough data, but from what I've played, I'm really happy about it. You can also check out the VOD. I think I played it 2 days in a row. It was kind of some other stuff in between, but in general, you can look at that if you want to. Fire Trap of Blasting is the next one on our list. This skill has seen some play, but I have not seen the kind of response to it that I think it deserves. One of the reasons why is because it got early dismissed because it looked like it was bugged. But just so you know, it actually does work. There's just a threshold under which the AoE of the skill doesn't work. So I put on Sunblast just so we can see it on our hideout. Right now, the AoE of these are minuscule. And I have Chain Reaction here, right? Which is 50% AoE. And then I have another 5% AoE right here. So what the hell is going on? Well, let's just increase the AoE by 5% and let's see what's going on now. There's a breakpoint and something's bugged. So right now, I think what's going on is you have to have 3.0 meter radius for the AoE to do anything. And before that, it's just going to be, I don't know, just a very small circle. It's not even base. It's like even smaller. But yeah, so this skill, it's not as easy as get 60% AoE or something, because the skill also has per level scaling in terms of radius. So for example, this is level 22. If I scaled this further, it would go from 0.9 to 1.1 meters. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. But if you want to try out the skill, you definitely want to get it to at least 3 meters. Otherwise, you're going to see what you just saw. Second, this skill is ridiculous when it comes to single target damage. The first time I actually saw this build was on PoE Ninja. I was feeling like Kobe today, and I was like just here. I was pressing at DPS, and at that time, I saw I think it was at the time 3.9 billion on the top when it comes to DPS, and it was Fire Trap of Blasting. And usually with PoE Ninja DPS, I was like, oh, so he's faking it. But I actually found out that he wasn't even optimized. He didn't even have an Adorn setup, and it was actually a lot more damage. And I was just kind of wondering why the hell this skill does so much damage. Now, what Fire Trap of Blasting basically does is it takes away the dot portion of the initial Fire Trap and just makes it a single hit with a lot more AoE, and also a chance for traps to trigger at additional time, which can be quite strong, especially if you're chain reaction. But the big selling point of this skill is the added fire damage against burning enemies, because it doesn't look like much. You might think, oh, I'm just going to add this to the normal fire damage. But as PoE Wiki states here rightfully, is this damage is added damage, so it actually cycles through the damage effectiveness, which means that it's not up to 1,316 damage. It's actually times 2.6. It is actually 3,421. Just so you know, that's currently more than any of the 8-second cooldown traps. Straight up. So, yeah, it has huge AoE if you scale its levels. Not as good as something like Explosive Trap of Shrapnel, for example. But just an absolute blaster of a single target damage skill. On a ZHB build, this will outdamage Ice Trap and Explosive Trap. That is all you need to know. Now, why is that? Obviously, what we just talked about, but also the ridiculous level scaling. If you look at PoE, you might be mistaken to think that early, obviously, Explosive Trap has a little bit better damage, but one thing about this skill is it has crazy level scaling. Whereas normal skills go up round about 10 to 12% more damage per level, this skill gets 17 to, I think, 18.5 or something per level. It is quite a big deal. And that is obviously because both of the moving parts, the base fire damage and then also the added fire damage, go up. Now, usually when you reach level 30, you have diminishing returns on spells when it comes to extra damage and you want to stop. But all that Fire Trap of Blasting does at level 30 is it goes down to what normal spells have normally. So it goes from like 17, 18% more damage to still getting like 11% more damage. This skill is an absolute end game powerhouse. And while I don't actually know if it's going to be a good League starter, it definitely isn't if they don't fix this bug. I will say that it has so much damage potential in endgame that you could maybe even take away some of that damage, go Saboteur, go a little bit more AoE, and maybe make it into a all-rounder for League Start. Who knows? Because it has slightly better clear than Explosive Trap. I will say this though, one thing that Explosive Trap has this league is Explosive Trap of Shrapnel. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. Next up, we'll talk about Ice Trap of Hollowness. So this skill just straight up has around about 20% more damage, I think actually 18 or something, than the original Ice Trap. So that's already a good thing. It also doesn't shotgun, right? It's just a really good trap. Now, base radius is 1.8 meter. Secondary base radius is 0.2, so it is quite a bit bigger. However, there's a change to the original version, which is that it is thrown in a donut shape, whereas Ice Trap hits basically all the area that you trigger it in. If we look at the Ice Trap right here, if we throw it, you can see that in the middle, there is this donut-shaped hole where it actually doesn't connect. Now, that's a problem because wherever it's triggered, it doesn't hit. Not a good combo. However, there is a ton of redeeming qualities about this skill. The first one is that's actually not as big of a deal as you think. So right now, I don't even have Conk Effect on. I just didn't scale any AoE. It is just not necessary, and you don't want it because the hole in the middle gets bigger and bigger. The AoE of this skill, even without any scaling, is fantastic. And that's actually an upside because you don't have to scale anything. And the donut in the middle is actually not big enough, with no AoE scaling, not big enough to deny hits against some of the bosses where you need the damage the most. With that said, the biggest selling point of this skill is not as obvious as you might think. It's actually the trap duration. Normal traps have a duration of 4 seconds. Ice Trap of Hollowness is, as far as I know, the only one with 2. That's a big deal because Sunblast exists. If you guys don't know what this is, Sunblast reduces your trap duration by 75%, which is actually an upside with this item. It rolls from 50 to 75. Skills which throw traps throw up to 2 additional traps. If you're not aware how much this mod is worth in terms of DPS, it is worth around about 200% more damage because now you don't have to use cluster traps. Not only do you not get the 55% less damage, less than half of the damage, you also open up a support gem. However, traps cannot be triggered by enemies. So you can throw it at them, nothing's gonna happen. But traps from skills are thrown randomly, and they do explode after the duration. That is kind of the shtick of this belt. So usually what you have is all these 4-second trap skills, and well, if you have a perfect roll, 75%, so it's only 1 second. So there's still 1 second delay, so it kind of feels like playing EA Ballista where you have to kind of wait for the damage. However, with the donut skill, it's only 0.5 seconds, as you can see right here. It's barely a downside. Whereas if you take something like any of the other traps, for example, Fire Trap of Blasting, if you do it with Sunblast, that is 1 second. That is double the amount. And while that doesn't sound like much in the hideout, having tested this in maps, it actually is quite a big difference. It is double the delay from 0.5 to 1 second, or differently spelled out, if you're League starting, Sunblast, right, is a tier 3 unique. You're not going to get a perfect roll. A min roll Sunblast on this skill is as good as a max roll on any other trap. And the last part here is that the traps are thrown randomly can be a big downside. For this skill, it really isn't. It's actually an upside. Because if you think about it, well, normally, what do you want to do? Normally, you want to throw it on top of the enemy. It gets triggered. But you don't need to throw it at the top of the enemy anymore, because they just explode randomly whenever they want to. But what the random means is wherever you put your cursor, these are now not going to fall there. They're going to fall randomly around where you put the cursor, which means the donut is not going to be on top of the enemy. It's actually going to be around it. And with this amount of AoE, that actually means that all the donuts will not hinder your damage whatsoever. So yeah, donut shape doesn't hit some stuff in the middle. We can take care of that with Sunblast. It has a 2-second duration, which is huge. Random is actually an upside here. And on top of that, at the end here, it's also, I mean, it freezes, which if you've ever played a Trapper, they're not the best defensively. They need everything they can get. There's a little bit of a delay until the trap lands. With Sunblast, there's even more delay, so you don't want things jumping at you. Freeze can be huge. Now, next up, let's talk about Explosive Trap of Shrapnel. Before we start even going into this skill, I wanted to point out that this is currently bugged in PoE. Now, what normal Explosive Trap does is it has actually a 1.3 meter explosion radius on the explosive traps. However, it also has a line down here that says small explosions have between 30% reduced, 30% increased base radius at random, which makes it a lot more random. You can't really guarantee that all of them are going to hit, but these are going to happen within this circle. So for example, like this, and the bigger hitbox your enemy has, the better they're going to overlap, but some of them are going to be really small randomly, right? Stuff like that. But it has very good overlap potential, and PoE can actually capture that. So if you go to normal explosive trap, it will, let's actually do that real quick. Normal explosive trap, if you go to Calx, it will actually tell you the overlap chance. So for example, without anything on this, I have 69% chance from the get-go. It has a significantly bigger explosion radius, but also the radius in which it falls is significantly bigger. This is the AoE you can expect with 0% increased AoE. And if you want to know how this looks with full, I can just tell you, you're not going to see your character or basically anything on the screen. Now, if you look at these individual explosions, you can clearly see that not that many of them are actually overlapping. The outer radius is just too big, and with Conk Effect, you can actually make that better. But what I'm trying to say is, in PoE, it will actually show you something wrong. If you go to average explosions hitting, and you now go to Explosive Trap of Shrapnel, it says overlap chance 100%. And what happened here is a little bit of an oopsie, because one of the radiuses was not input correctly. It's actually supposed to be 18 and 36 and not 19 and 18. So I don't know if that ever gets fixed, but if you're thinking that you're going to have this kind of crazy clear speed and this kind of crazy single target, you don't. However, while it's bugged currently in PoE, it isn't in game. It has a huge clear speed potential for trappers. There's nothing out there that has even close to this kind of AoE. Even Ice Trap cannot compete with this. So it solves something that Explosive Trap has been after for a while. Explosive Trap is one of those skills that I think is permanently underrated. One of the main reasons is for Leaguestart, it's kind of rough to clear with it. You really need levels to get it going, and especially in the first few levels, it feels kind of awkward. And one of the problems with normal Explosive Trap is also if you scale AoE, that will actually be a detriment. There's obviously certain breakpoints where you have the perfect explosion overlap. You can play around with it in PoE, but in general, it doesn't want you to scale AoE. And whenever a skill doesn't want you to scale AoE, that's a problem for clear. However, with Explosive Trap of Shrapnel, not a big deal. I'm not thinking about scaling AoE with a skill that clears like this. You really don't have to. So you can play both in a build, which might be awkward. You might have to gem swap, but you now have an option for Explosive Trap. And even though, yes, it does have 20% more damage than the original Explosive Trap per explosion, I still want to make it clear to you, this has probably around half the single target damage, which can be a pretty big deal. However, I feel like Explosive Trap has been in the shadow of so many things. First, it was in the shadow of Seismic Trap. Then it was in the shadow of Ice Trap because Ice Trap was so good with Heat Shiver. And now it might be outshadowed by some of the traps I listed before. I just wanted to point it out. This skill is by no means bad. It is actually very, very solid. And one thing that Explosive Trap has is one of the best qualities in the game, just to point this out. So it scales incredibly well with Ashes of the Stars. Dialas, you would still always pick the +2 levels, at least as far as I know. But getting +2 smaller explosions, going from 7 or 8 explosions up to 10 or 11 is just brutal. Especially with Ashes of the Stars going over 10. Helps a lot. Will also help quite a bit with Explosive Trap of Shrapnel's clear even more. And I think Explosive Trap is worth making work. It has such a huge damage potential. And now with this, you can also leverage that huge damage potential by decreasing your damage, throwing in Explosive Trap of Shrapnel. You're probably still going to one-shot everything. you can have 50% less damage, but now you can clear whole screens. On the last note here, what I get asked a lot is, what Ascendancy would you play on a Trapper? I thought about this a lot over the last few days. I've also tried out a few builds. And after considering everything, I think that the Saboteur nerf is actually a little bit overstated in terms of how big it is for Trappers. Now, removing the cooldown recovery rate here was mostly big. The cooldown recovery rate for traps was mostly big because of Seismic Trap. There was obviously a little bit more taken away, but in a sense, it's also more flexible. And some of the other Ascendancies are a lot stronger than they used to be. And when it comes to Seismic Trap, well, cooldown recovery doesn't really matter for most of these skills I've talked about today. So I think Saboteur is still a top contender. Now, where do I see Saboteur? I think Saboteur is mostly great on Leaguestart. It has a variety of stats. First up, it starts with 82% AoE. Every one of these small nodes has 8% AoE on top of the 50% of chain reaction. Talking about chain reaction, it is so big while clearing. It is, I know some traps don't need it, but it is still such a huge quality of life thing. You get Ignite and Shock Immune, which alongside Freeze Immune from the Pantheon already fixes so many problems on Leaguestart. You get Born in the Shadows, which especially on your low Fizz hit on the right side of the tree will help a ton. 15% less damage taken. We're basically talking Fortify. It's crazy strong. It's crazy. It's really synergistic with Grace. You have like Clockwork if you have a cooldown skill. And otherwise, you also have Bomb Specialist, for example, for ailments. It's just a great all-rounder Ascendancy. One of the biggest feats of Saboteur, though, is that you can later respec into one of the two endgame Ascendancies, which are Trickster and Assassin. Trickster just has a ton of trap throwing speed, which just makes the build feel a lot better. You get maximum frenzy charges, which gives you a ton of trap throwing speed with charge traps. You also get one step ahead, which you can later respec once you have action speed on your boots. You get Spellbreaker, you get Escape Artist. You can have a very defensive Trapper if you want to lean more into an all-rounder. It scales incredibly well with gear and might outshine Saboteur depending on what you want to do. And then as a third option, you also have Assassin, which is your go-to one-shot Trapper. You want to go into Eater, right? Uber Eater, and just one-shot him. That is going to be your Ascendancy. It's going to be around about double the damage of the other two Ascendancies. And we also have some other things to think about. The first one is Inquisitor. Since most Trappers have very little access to actual defenses, some of them will opt for EB Mom, right? Eldritch Battery plus Mind over Matter to get a little bit more max hit in. And Inquisitor plays into that wonderfully. Since you don't have Leech and you're a Trapper, getting Pious Path and getting that passive regen to not only fix your mana cost, but also get a lot more just regen in general is huge. You get more damage, you get Righteous Providence, and even Inevitable Judgment can be good. Or if it's not good on your build, you just want to go for minus res curses, you can also go for Augury of Penitence. Or potentially some Battle Mage shenanigans, but who knows. And the last one here I want to talk about is Hierophant. If you have a lightning trap, you can actually consider this. I haven't really figured out how to do this completely. The main problem with Hierophant is definitely not its damage output. If you want to go Mana Stacker, so basically you can go Divine Guidance, Sanctuary of Thought, huge AoE, huge max hit, huge defenses. Arcane Blessing is so strong right now. Even though the cast speed doesn't really affect you, it is still incredible. And you have either Illuminated Devotion, which is not going to be that great. You're most likely going to take Conviction of Power. Once again, great one. The problem mainly that I've had is I don't know how to recover that much mana on a Trapper. It's pretty easy with EB Mom, but with mana, I just don't really know. You have no Leech. You don't have Ritual of Awakening to give you that much mana regen. You can maybe get to like 1,000 and it's still going to feel clunky. But in general, if I was to play a Trapper, I would play one of the Shadow Ascendancies because they are so interchangeable for whatever you need at the time. For most League starters, I would still say Sabo, although there is some tricksters in there, especially for traps that are not AoE based or people on hardcore. But yeah, in general, I really hope that next league is going to be more of an exploration. We had so many new skills and not that many people have actually been experimenting, me included. I just got completely burned out by the MF meta. There was not that much interest in general, which I understand. Everybody just wants to farm their currency. But I really hope next league we're going to go back to maybe a little bit more of a normal game state. In general, I think so many Transfigured gems are still unexplored and there's still new ones coming out. Especially with traps, I think they got some of the best candidates to be explored next league. And it's very unlikely that they get nerfed because they're quite under the radar. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.